A flood pump is the only thing standing between a city and the sea, and it doesn't run on good intentions. My name is Howard Grabowski. I'm 60 years old, and for the last 28 of them, I was the master pump mechanic for the New Orleans Sewerage and Water Board. Mostly, I kept the big boys running, the ancient behemoth wood screw pumps that are the city's last, best defense against the Gulf of Mexico. If you love stories about underdogs who refuse to stay down, and the sweet justice that comes when experience meets arrogance, hit that like button and subscribe right now. You're in the right place. 2 days before the humiliation, I was waist deep in grease and brackish water at pumping station number 6. A thrust bearing on pump 4, a machine installed in 1928, was running hot. The digital sensors Preston's team had installed were screaming about it, sending alerts to iPads in offices miles away. The solution from on high was to shut it down. I knew better. I shut off the sensor, not the pump. I listened. You can learn more from the sound of a 50-ton machine than any computer will ever tell you. A low groan, a slight change in the harmonic rhythm. It wasn't the bearing itself. It was the lubricant feed line, starved for oil. An hour with a wrench and a new copper line I had fabricated myself 5 years prior, and the temperature dropped back to normal. The groan disappeared. I turned the sensor back on. The red alert on some distant iPad turned green. Problem solved. That was my job. I didn't manage spreadsheets. I didn't synergize paradigms. I kept the water on the right side of the walls. The summons came on a Wednesday. An email from a secretary I didn't know for a meeting in a conference room I had never been in. On the 12th floor of the central office building, a glass and steel box downtown where the air was always recycled and smelled faintly of lavender-scented cleaner. I wore my work khakis and a clean blue shirt with my name, Howie, stitched over the pocket. I took the service elevator up. My boots left dusty outlines on the polished marble floor. He didn't look up when I walked in. Preston Delacroix III. That's what the little brass nameplate on his vast empty desk said. He was 27. I knew this because it had been in the internal newsletter announcing his arrival as the new director of urban redevelopment and systems optimization. He was staring intently at his laptop, fingers flying across the keyboard. He was probably tweeting about it, or whatever they do now. He wore a crisp, dark Armani suit that probably cost more than the transmission I'd just rebuilt on my 1996 Chevy Suburban. On his wrist was a Rolex that glinted under the recessed lighting. His hair was perfect. His hands, resting near the keyboard, were manicured and soft. They were hands that had never held anything heavier than a latte. I stood there. The silence stretched. It's a tactic. I learned that in the Army Corps of Engineers, decades ago. The man who speaks first often loses. I can wait. I've waited out storms, floods, and politicians. I could certainly wait out a child in a suit. Finally, he closed the laptop with a soft click. He picked up a single sheet of paper from his desk and looked at it, not at me. Howard Grabowski, he said, mispronouncing my last name. Here, I said. He began to read from the paper. His voice was flat, rehearsed. As part of the city's ongoing Smart City initiative and our strategic realignment toward a more agile, data-driven infrastructure model, we are reevaluating all legacy positions. Legacy. The word hung in the sterile air. He used it like an insult, like something you scrape off the bottom of your shoe. Those pumps I maintained weren't legacy. They were monuments. They were proof that some things were built to last. Your role, he continued, his eyes still fixed on the script, has been identified as redundant in the new operational paradigm. Your expertise, while valued in its time, is tied to outdated systems that are being phased out for more efficient, automated solutions. He paused, as if for dramatic effect. He still hadn't made eye contact. In his world, he wasn't firing a man. He was deleting a line item. Effective immediately, your employment with the New Orleans Sewerage and Water Board is terminated. He slid a manila envelope across the polished wood of the desk. It stopped a few feet from me. My final paycheck. Cobra information. The corporate script for a life's work undone. Human Resources will escort you to your station to collect your personal belongings. Your access card has been deactivated. You have 20 minutes. A dead calm settled over me. There was no surge of blood to my face, no tremor in my hands. It was the same feeling I got when a levee was threatening to breach. The moment when panic is a luxury you can't afford, and all that's left is cold clarity. I looked at him, really looked at him, the son of a prominent developer who sat on 3 city-related boards. A kid with a freshly framed MBA from Dartmouth's Tuck School of Business hanging on the wall behind him, positioned perfectly in the center. He thought he had all the power. He had a title, a budget, and the board's approval. But what he didn't understand was the difference between authority and control. I didn't touch the envelope. "I see," I said. My voice was even. For the first time, he looked up. His eyes were a flat, uninterested blue. He was expecting me to argue, to plead, to talk about my 28 years, to mention my wife, my daughter's tuition at Tulane, the life I had built on the promise of a city job with a pension. He wanted a scene. It would validate his decision. The old man, unable to accept the future. I gave him nothing. "Your time here is over," he said, a little dismissively, as if I were slow to understand. "We need people who are agile." "Good luck with that," I said. I turned and walked toward the door. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I could feel his smug satisfaction radiating behind me. He thought he had won. He thought he was cutting dead weight. He didn't realize he was cutting the brake lines. I knew for sure 3 weeks ago this was coming. The memos had started circulating. Buzzwords bloomed like mold on damp drywall. Optimization, synergy, digital transformation. They were the vocabulary of people who produce nothing but meetings. Preston was a high priest of this new religion. My name is Howard Grabowski, and I am the only Army Corps of Engineers certified legacy pump operator for machinery exceeding 150,000 gallons per minute in the entire state of Louisiana. It's not a certificate you get from a weekend course. It's a designation earned over decades, grandfathered in through federal mandates written after the last time the water came over the walls. And hurricane season was 8 weeks away. Back in 2005, I didn't sleep for 9 days. I was at the same station, number 6, when Katrina hit. The 17th Street Canal levee failed not a half-mile away. The water didn't seep in. It arrived like a fist. The power went out. The backup generators submerged, sputtered, and died. The pumps, our magnificent, powerful pumps, fell silent. I remember the sound, the roar of the storm outside, and the sudden, terrifying silence of the machinery inside. It was the sound of a city drowning. We had a crew of 12 then. We stayed. We worked in chest-deep, foul water with flashlights and hand tools, trying to get the diesels running. The water smelled of salt, sewage, and death. My 1996 Chevy Suburban, parked on a small patch of high ground near the station, survived. It was my home for 3 of those 9 days. That's why the faded Katrina Survivor sticker is still on the back window. It's not for the truck. It's for me. We both made it through. We both still ran. After the flood, when the federal money poured in, so did the experts. They came from Washington and Boston and California, with plans and charts and PowerPoints. They wanted to scrap the old wood screw pumps. They called them inefficient, antiquated. 20th century technology, one of them said, sneering. An old engineer from the Army Corps, a man named General McCoy, who had forgotten more about hydrology than these kids would ever learn, pulled me aside. He was in his late 70s then, with a face like a road map of every river he'd ever dammed. "Howie," he said, his voice a low rumble. "They're going to try and replace these beasts with 1,000 little computer-controlled toys. And when the next big one comes, those toys are going to fail. The power will go out, the networks will crash, and the only thing that will stand a chance is a 2,000 horsepower diesel engine connected to a simple, massive screw you can practically fix with a hammer." He was right. We fought them. A small group of us, old-timers from the board, a few city councilmen who actually grew up in the lower ninth, and McCoy with his immense institutional weight. We didn't win completely, but we got a compromise. They could install their new smart systems, but the core infrastructure, the 6 massive primary screw pumps, had to remain as the ultimate failsafe. And McCoy, in his wisdom, added one more thing. He helped draft the language for the federal funding compliance. It was buried deep in a rider on an appropriations bill in a section no one ever reads. 33 CFR 208.10. It stipulated that any pumping station with a primary outflow capacity greater than 150,000 gallons per minute that utilized pre-1940 mechanical screw technology required a certified legacy pump operator to be on staff and present for any activation during a named storm or citywide emergency. The certification process was rigorous, overseen by the Corps itself, and based almost entirely on documented, hands-on experience. When the regulation passed, there were 3 of us in Louisiana. Now, there was just me. One day, McCoy had told me, handing me my framed certificate, some kid with a fancy degree who thinks he can run the world from his phone is going to tell you you're obsolete. This piece of paper isn't just a job description, son. It's the keys to the kingdom. Don't ever forget that. I never did. The certificate was in a safe deposit box at my bank. Preston Delacroix III, with his Dartmouth MBA and his Ferragamo loafers, had just fired the keys to the kingdom. The 2 security guards who escorted me were apologetic. One of them, a man named Frank, I'd known for 15 years. He looked at the floor. "Sorry, Howie," he mumbled. "It's his orders." "Not your fault, Frank," I said. "A man's got to do his job." We went to my small, cluttered office at Station 6. It wasn't much. A metal desk, a worn-out chair, and walls covered in faded schematics of the pumps. On one wall hung a framed photo of the original construction crew from 1928. Dozens of men in overalls and caps, standing proudly in front of the massive gears they had just installed. They looked like they were building something that mattered. Preston's 20 minutes. I didn't need them. I took 2 things: a picture of my wife, Sarah, and my daughter, Chloe, and a thick, leather-bound logbook from the top drawer of my desk. It wasn't city property. It was mine. For 28 years, I had documented every repair, every quirk, every custom part, every gut feeling about each of the 6 pumps. The official records were all digitized now, stored on some server Preston probably had a dashboard for. But the real knowledge, the institutional memory, was in the ink on these pages. I left my keycard on the desk. I left the silver pen the mayor had given me after we got through Hurricane Ivan without a single failure. Let them have their symbols. I had the substance. As I walked out of the station for the last time, I passed pump number 4. It was humming along perfectly, a quiet, steady thrum of power. The sound of a city safe from the water. For now. I got in my old Suburban. It fired up with a familiar, comforting roar. I didn't go home. I drove south, toward Plaquemines Parish, toward my fishing camp. It's a small, stilted cabin on the edge of the bayou, a place Sarah hates because of the mosquitoes, but a place I find peace. The breaking point for them came faster than I expected. 6 weeks later, not 8. During that time, I heard things, whispers from my old crew. Frank, the security guard, would call me every few days. "It's a mess, Howie," he said on one call. "The kid, Delacroix, he walks through the station like he's touring a museum. He points at things. He brought in a team of consultants, all of them younger than my son. They talk about stress testing the digital twin. I chuckled. The digital twin? Yeah. Some computer model of the pumps. They say it's more accurate than the real thing. They were about to learn the difference between a simulation and reality. A week later, Frank called again. Pump 2 is making a noise, a clicking. The new guys ran a diagnostic. The computer says it's acoustic interference. They put sound dampening panels around it. I knew that sound. It wasn't interference. It was the shear pin on the primary drive shaft beginning to show metal fatigue. It was a $50 part that, if it failed under load, would cause the drive shaft to disengage, potentially cracking the entire housing. A multi-million-dollar repair. I'd noted in my logbook that it needed to be replaced every 2,000 operational hours. It was at 1,950 when I left. Then came the storm. It started as a tropical depression in the southern Gulf, what the news called a low-end threat. But we locals know better. The Gulf is a bathtub full of hot water in August. Low-end threats can become monsters overnight. This one did. They named her Clara. Within 36 hours, she was a Category 2 hurricane with a projected track aimed straight for the mouth of the Mississippi, straight for New Orleans. My phone started ringing. It wasn't Frank. It was my old foreman, a good man named Miguel. "Boss, we got a problem," he said, his voice tight with stress. Delacroix ordered a full system activation test, all 6 main pumps. He wants to validate the network's resilience under full load. I sat on the porch of my cabin, watching the wind pick up in the cypress trees. And Pump 2's shear pin went, just like you said it would. It didn't crack the housing, thank God, but it's offline. They can't figure out how to get the old one out. And that's not the worst of it. The new automated switchgear for Pump 5 is fried. A power surge from the grid. It won't engage. The manual override is behind a panel that requires a specific key. A T-handle key with a brass tag, I said quietly. Number 7. Yeah, Howie, where is it? In my toolbox, at my house, where it's been for 20 years. Silence on the line. He knew what that meant. Preston's smart system had a single, analog point of failure, and the man who knew about it was currently watching herons fish in the bayou. They're trying to cut the panel open with a grinder, Miguel said. It's a circus. Here's what Preston Delacroix didn't know. He thought the pumps were the asset. He was wrong. The pumps were just iron and steel. The asset was the knowledge, the decades of dealing with their moods, their weaknesses, their strengths. He hadn't just fired a mechanic. He had erased the library. The call from the mayor's office came the next morning. Clara was now a Category 3. Mandatory evacuations had been ordered for the low-lying parishes. The city was holding its breath. It wasn't the mayor himself. Not at first. It was a deputy chief of staff, a woman with a sharp, impatient voice. "Mr. Grabowski," she snapped, "we have an emergency situation. We need you to report to Pumping Station 6 immediately." It wasn't a request. It was an order. The kind of order they were used to giving. I let the silence hang for a moment. I took a sip of my coffee. It was hot and black. "I'm sorry," I said calmly. "You must have me confused with someone who works for the city. I was terminated 6 weeks ago." "This is not the time for games," she said, her voice rising. "The mayor has authorized your immediate reinstatement." "That's very generous of him," I said. "But I do not accept. I'm retired now. I'm enjoying my pension." I wasn't, of course. They had frozen it. Pending review. Another one of Preston's efficiencies. I could hear her sputtering. She was unprepared for the word no. In her world, people complied. "I'll have the mayor call you directly," she said, and slammed the phone down. An hour later, my phone rang again. The caller ID said Mayor's Office. This time, it was him. Mayor Thompson. A career politician, but a man who understood the city's precarious relationship with water. He had been a city councilman during Katrina. He had seen the bodies. "Howie," he began, his voice weary. He didn't use my last name. That was smart. "We have a problem." "So I hear," I said. "Listen, I know there were some personnel changes that might have been handled poorly. Preston Delacroix was overzealous. But right now, I have a city of 500,000 people, and 2 of my 6 primary pumps are offline with a Category 3 storm less than 100 miles offshore. I need you." I looked out at the water. The surface was choppy, the sky a bruised purple-gray. The wind was starting to howl. "Mr. Mayor," I said, my voice as calm and steady as the deep hum of a well-maintained pump. "The problem is bigger than 2 offline pumps. The problem is that as we speak, the city is in direct violation of federal law." I explained it to him. Slowly, methodically, I cited the regulation, 33 CFR 208.10. I explained the legacy pump operator certification. I explained that without me, or someone with my credentials, activating those pumps during a named storm would be an illegal act, jeopardizing all federal disaster relief funding in the aftermath and opening the city up to catastrophic legal liability. There was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the line. I could hear him breathing. I could almost hear the political calculations turning over in his mind. He wasn't just dealing with a flood. He was dealing with a legal and financial apocalypse. "What does this mean, Howie?" he finally asked, his voice strained. "It means your wunderkind with the MBA, in his effort to optimize, has legally disarmed the city's primary defense system on the eve of a major battle. He didn't just sideline a player, Mr. Mayor. He forfeited the game." "What do you want, Howie?" he asked. The question was stripped of all pretense. It was the sound of utter defeat, the sound of a man who had run out of options. This was the moment, the culmination of 28 years of thankless work, of missed family dinners, of hands stained permanently with grease, the moment of quiet vindication. I had thought about this, not in a vengeful way, but in a practical one. What was the price for their arrogance? What was the cost of their mistake? It had to be a number so large it couldn't be ignored, a number that would echo in the city budget for years, a number that said, "This is what experience is worth." "I have 3 terms," I said. I laid them out, one by one. First, my compensation, a one-time consulting and activation fee, $3 million, transferred to an account of my choosing before I leave my property. He choked. I heard it, a small, sharp intake of breath. $3 million? Howie, that's insane. I can't authorize that. You can, I said flatly. You have emergency discretionary funds. I've read the city charter, and it's not insane. It's the price. It's hazard pay for working in a storm. It's the fee for fixing a problem of your administration's making. And it's the cost of buying back the city's insurance policy, which is what I am. I let that sink in. Second, I continued, the immediate and public resignation of Preston Delacroix III. I don't want him quietly reassigned. I want him gone, and I want it announced. Howie. Third, I said, cutting him off. A public apology. Not from you, Mr. Mayor. From him. I want Preston Delacroix to stand on the steps of City Hall after the storm has passed and the city is safe and apologize, not to me, to the people of this city, for his hubris, for endangering them through his ignorance. He needs to say the words legacy and experience and value and mean them. The silence on the line was now profound. I could hear the wind whipping against his window, a faint echo of the storm that was about to hit his city. He was trapped. Clara was his deadline. The law was his cage. I was his only key. Give me 1 hour, he said, his voice a ghost of what it was before. He hung up. 52 minutes later, my phone buzzed. It was a text message from a number I didn't recognize. A wire transfer confirmation from a city account. The amount was $3 million. 5 minutes after that, the mayor called back. "The money is sent," he said, his voice hollow. "Delacroix has tendered his resignation, effective immediately. The press release is being drafted." "And the apology?" I asked. "He agreed," the mayor sighed. "He will do it." "Then I'll be there in 2 hours," I said. "Send a state trooper to escort me. The roads will be closing soon." I hung up. I walked into my cabin and grabbed my old worn tool bag. I looked at the photo of Sarah and Chloe. I wasn't just doing this for the money or the revenge. I was doing it for them. For the stability I had promised them. The stability that kid in the suit had tried to take away. I was doing it for the men in the 1928 photograph on my office wall. You don't let something they built with their bare hands fail because of a spreadsheet. The drive into the city was surreal. The trooper escort, lights flashing, cleared a path through streets clogged with people fleeing. We were driving into the storm, against the tide of survival. When I arrived at Station 6, it was chaos. People were shouting. Phones were ringing. On a giant monitor, I could see the weather map. A furious, swirling vortex of red and orange getting closer by the minute. And in the middle of it all stood a small, defeated-looking group of young men in matching polo shirts. Preston's optimization team. They looked at me like I was a ghost. Miguel saw me first. A huge grin split his tired face. "Howie, thank God." I ignored the consultants. I ignored the frantic energy. I walked over to the silent, hulking mass of pump number 2. The side panel was mangled from their attempts with the grinder. "Get me a crowbar and a 3-pound sledge," I said. It took me less than 5 minutes to pry the damaged panel off. I reached in, found the broken shear pin, and knocked it out with a practice tap. I had 3 spares in my tool bag. I greased a new one and slid it into place. "Miguel," I said, not looking up, "go start the auxiliary diesel for 5. I'll get the switchgear." I walked to my old office. My keycard was still on the desk where I'd left it. I ignored it. I walked to my locker, which they hadn't bothered to empty. I pulled out my old keyring. On it was the T-handle key, with the brass tag stamped with a 7. Back on the main floor, I unlocked the manual override panel for pump 5. I threw the heavy switch. There was a loud, satisfying clunk as the gears engaged. The lights on the control panel flickered, then held steady. "She's ready, Miguel!" I yelled over the din. He gave me a thumbs up from across the room. A moment later, the diesel engine for pump 5 coughed to life with a belch of black smoke, then settled into a deep, powerful roar. One by one, I went to each pump, not just the broken ones, all 6. I laid my hands on the housings, feeling the vibrations. I listened. I checked the grease points. I bypassed the pointless new sensors and relied on the old analog gauges, the ones with real needles that told the truth. Within an hour, all 6 pumps were online and ready. The chaos had subsided, replaced by the thrum of immense controlled power. The water level in the canals was rising, pushed up by the storm surge. But inside the station, we were ready. The storm hit that night. It was a monster. But the pumps did their job. We moved billions of gallons of water. We held the line. The city flooded in some of the usual low spots, but the levees held, and the pumping stations, the heart of the city's defense, did not fail. 3 days later, the sky was clear, and the water had receded. The city was battered, but alive, and Preston Delacroix III stood on the steps of City Hall. He looked smaller, without his Armani suit. He wore a plain blue one, a concession to humility. The cameras flashed. The reporters shouted questions. The mayor stood behind him, his face a mask of grim duty. Preston cleared his throat and read from a prepared statement. His voice trembled. "I stand before you today," he began, "to offer my deepest apology to the citizens of New Orleans." He talked about his vision and his goals. Then he got to the part that mattered. "In my zeal for modernization," he said, his eyes on the paper, "I made a grave error. I devalued the immense, irreplaceable worth of institutional knowledge. I dismissed experience as legacy, when in fact, it is the bedrock upon which this city's safety is built. The men and women who operate our critical infrastructure are not dead weight. They are the lifeline. My actions put this city at risk, and for that, I am profoundly sorry." He folded the paper. He didn't look up. He turned and was quickly ushered back inside the building, away from the cameras. Gone. A footnote in the city's history. A cautionary tale for the next MBA who thinks he knows better. They gave me a new title, Assistant Director of Water Management, Legacy Systems. They gave me a new office on the 12th floor, right next to where Preston's used to be. My salary was tripled. My pension was restored and backdated. They gave me full authority over the 6 main pumps and veto power over any new technology that might compromise them. I spent one day in that new office. I had them move my old metal desk and my worn-out chair into it. It looked ridiculous against the floor-to-ceiling windows. I hung the picture of the 1928 crew on the wall. The next day, I promoted Miguel to station foreman and took a 4-week vacation, the first one longer than a weekend in 15 years. I spent it at my fishing camp. The check for $3 million was in the bank. My daughter's final 2 years at Tulane were paid in full. Sometimes I drive by Station 6. I don't go in. I just park my old Suburban across the street and listen. The sound is different now. It's the same hum of the pumps, the same song of power. But underneath it, there's a new note. The sound of respect. Authority is a title on a door. Control is knowing which key to turn, which lever to pull, and having the guts to demand your price when they realize they can't live without you. They wanted a smart city. They learned the hard way that the smartest thing you can have is a man who knows how to keep the water out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Hit that like button, leave a comment, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories of hard-earned justice.